What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name is M, and today we will be discussing how you can make 500 horsepower in your 5.7 liter HEMI powered vehicle. The background is a lot different than it normally is. Usually all you see is a big old Stage 8 locking fasteners banner because the recording setup that I had was not ideal or optimal whatsoever. But now that we have the shack to shop series, and the shack is turned into a shop for the most part, and I can sit in here, gather my thoughts, and actually talk to you guys, this is going to be the new recording space for most of our future videos, unless I decide to record at home, out and about, or something of that nature. Now, before just jumping in head first, I would like to say, yes, this is for pre-Eagle and Eagle 5.7 liter Hemis. No matter if you have a 5.7 liter Hemi from 2003 or a 5.7 liter Hemi from 2023, 500 horsepower at the crank or flywheel is achievable for you. Let's go ahead and talk about it. So, to simplify it overall, it'll basically be cam and bolt-ons versus forced induction. These are the two ways that you are going to get to 500 horsepower. Of course, you can combine them, but for this video, we will have them on their respective sides. So let's go ahead and start off with the easier option of forced induction. The best bang for your buck and the easiest install is most likely going to be forced induction. There's turbo kits such as Walker Induction Solutions, On3 Performance, and then there's Hellion Twin Turbo kits. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have the Hellcat blowers that you can adapt to any Gen 3 Hemi, or you have Pro Chargers, which are in the Century blower class, and then you have root style blowers, you have your Whipples and things like that. And turbos versus superchargers is a whole conversation by itself. However, every single one of these forced induction kits that you are going to adapt to or mount to a Gen 3 Hemi is most likely going to perform similarly. So a lot of times you will make between 120 to 130, we'll call it an average of 125 rear wheel horsepower at 6 psi with any of these forced induction kits. That comes out to about 480 crank horsepower when added to the stock motor in total at 6 psi, 5 psi, 7 psi, whatever their entry level is for that 120 to 130 rear wheel horsepower range. So with any of these kits on low boost, just bolting it on with a otherwise stock motor, you should be able to see right around 480 horsepower to the crank. That is on low boost. You are going to make that to the flywheel on low boost. Now this is around 6 psi, and of course every pound of boost you introduce is going to introduce more power into the equation. So just turning it up a little bit can make sure that you hit that 500 horsepower mark. 6 to 8 psi is generally considered safe on these motors, especially when you're talking about longevity. So that is perfectly in the realm of you making that 480 to 500 horsepower number. So if we do a little bit of handy dandy math right here, if you're adding 6 pounds of boost and it's 125 rear wheel horsepower on average, we'll divide that by the 6 pounds of boost. That's approximately 20.83 horsepower per pound of boost introduced. So seeing that you pick up approximately 20.83 horsepower per pound of boost introduced into the equation, let's multiply this by 8, and that's approximately 166 horsepower to the rear wheels. So again, to approximate the crank horsepower that you will be adding or you will be at, you have to account for the parasitic loss of approximately 17%. So that comes out to 195 horsepower at the crank or flywheel versus the 166 to the rear tire added on 8 pounds of boost, typically and in theory. At 8 psi, if you are adding 195 crank horsepower or somewhere in the 165 rear wheel horsepower range on 8 pounds of boost, you should be at 535 crank horsepower on a pre-Eagle motor. All right, y'all, so as you can see, I am not in the shop and I have to interject. So we are currently editing the video that you are watching right now, and I kept saying 340 horsepower, 340 horsepower, 340 horsepower. That is only for the pre-Eagle 5.7 liter Hemi. So the difference between the Pre-Eagle and the Eagle 5.7 liter Hemi is 50 horsepower. That horsepower difference is at the crank, with the Pre-Eagle coming in at 340 horsepower and the Eagle coming in at 390 horsepower. So seeing that right now the Pre-Eagle would be making 535 to the crank, that means that the Eagle theoretically would be making 585 to the crank. So now that I clarified these things, let's go ahead and get back into the video. I got to get back editing. Hope y'all enjoy. So this is a great way for you to achieve the numbers that you are looking for without having to do an immense amount of work, as well as spend money on all of these different things. It consolidates it. You spend money on one thing, a kit, unless you put together your own kit to run, you know, the Hellcat Supercharger or something like that. And then if you're not doing it yourself, then there's the install cost, of course, but there's not really much else to it. A lot of times they give you everything that you need in these kits. If you go buy a Whipple, you're gonna be able to bolt it on. You go get a Pro Charger kit, as long as it's not a tuner kit, you're gonna be able to bolt it on. You got injectors. Sometimes they even include a tuner for you. So that is the first avenue to get yourself to that 500 horsepower mark at the flywheel, or even above that. And just to mention quickly, if you would like to help support builds, further the projects, and support the channel in a monetary way without just throwing money at something that you're not really seeing a return on, go ahead and check out the link below. We have merchandise, more merchandise is coming out. We're gonna have a piston and rod design very, very soon, as well as a built by hand, driven by passion design. That is one of our main mottos over here. But if you don't have the coin or you don't feel like it, I just appreciate you watching this video right here. Leave a comment and you know, help the algorithm know that you like the video so it pushes it to more people. Appreciate you. Let's hop right back in the video. Now that I am done talking about the forced induction route, let's go ahead and talk about the cam and bolt-on route. That the forced induction route was easier, more simplified, and just more condensed in general. It's not going to be as complicated to hit that number, and this is why. So there are different grinds of camshaft. There are different stages, which there are just different lifts, durations, and everything else that affect the way that your motor is going to work moving that air. And the valve springs are dependent on the camshaft. They're dependent on each other. How high you can rev out with that cam is going to determine which springs you are going to need to use. For example, the camshaft that I am going with can rev out to about 6,700 RPM while still making power, but it peaks about 6,600 RPM. The intensity of your cam is going to determine a lot. Of course, the more aggressive camshafts are going to provide more power. However, they are going to require more as well. The more aggressive camshafts are going to require you to delete MDS, so that's non-MDS lifters. That is removing the MDS solenoids and going ahead and putting in MDS solenoid plugs. And of course, you will need to upgrade the valve springs and retainers as well to help strengthen that valve train, especially when you're revving out to a higher RPM. If you are revving out to 6,700 RPM, that is a whole lot different than the stock 5,600 RPM shift point. And then of course, when talking about a performance camshaft, you are always going to be talking about push rods. All of these things should be included in a quality kit though. A camshaft, intake work, and exhaust work are what you need for these 5.7 liter Hemis to make some decent power naturally aspirated. We talked about the camshaft, so let's go ahead and talk about the exhaust. Now for the exhaust side of things, of course, I'm going to mention headers. You can either go the shorty route, they have aftermarket, or the SRT shorty headers, or there are long tubes. Of course, those SRT shorty headers are going to be a little bit more of a budget route, and shorty headers are going to make less power overall. The long tubes are going to be the best route if you were trying to maximize your power output. You'll see about 15 to 20 more horsepower with long tube headers over the shorty headers. No matter which way you go about it, running some headers on your 5.7 liter Hemi is going to net you some more power, and it's going to sound a whole lot better. Now let's go ahead and discuss the intake side of things. This is an argument that is common in the Hemi community, and some people prefer the 6.1 intake, some people prefer the 6.4 intake, and some people like aftermarket intakes. No matter what, with the stock intake manifold, there's power left on the table. There are pros and cons, and everybody's gonna look at the situation differently. However, a 6.1 liter intake manifold or 6.4 liter intake manifold will be beneficial overall. If you have a camshaft that's able to move an immense amount of air compared to the stock camshaft, and you have these headers, all you need is an intake manifold that can match the energy of these other two modifications, and you have yourself a more efficient air pump or combustion engine. Squeezing that extra bit of power in every aspect is going to make a huge difference in you actually achieving your goal. So with more aggressive camshafts, you are typically going to pick up around 70 to 110 horsepower with a 5.7 liter HEMI. Let's just average that out at about 80. That is what my camshaft should be picking up. Then talking about adding headers into the mix, let's average that out at 25 to 30 horsepower. And then to touch on the intake manifold, no matter if you run the 6.1 liter or 6.4 liter intake manifold, that should roughly come out to about 25 horsepower. So seeing that we have been starting with the 340 horsepower number, which is the pre-Eagle motors, so just the intake camshaft and headers all averaged out, will leave you around 475 horsepower. And that's talking about a pre-Eagle engine that has 340 horsepower. If you're talking about an Eagle 5.7 liter HEMI, you are already in the clear. Sorry if you hear the ruckus in the background. My pops is mowing so we can maintain the actual property that the shop sits on. The pre-Eagle 5.7 liter HEMI makes less power than the Eagle 5.7 liter HEMI from factory, and as you can see, it is a pretty substantial number. So that puts us at over 500 horsepower naturally aspirated with the Eagle 5.7 liter HEMIs. However, we do still have to get those pre-Eagle 5.7 liter HEMIs up to or above that 500 horsepower mark. And the way that we can do that is addressing the cylinder heads. The pre-Eagle 5.7 liter HEMI has the worst flowing cylinder head out of all the Gen 3 HEMIs. So if you take those pre-Eagle 5.7 liter heads and you have them ported and polished and or decked, you can up the compression, up flow, and pre-Eagle heads, they actually can be ported to flow nicely. 6.1 liter heads flow approximately 321 CFM at 600 lift out of the box. Now you can basically achieve those same numbers from porting and polishing a pre-Eagle head, but then that head is tapped out, or you could choose to do a cylinder head swap. So like I said, the 6.1 liter heads flow approximately 321 CFM, and the Eagle cylinder heads flow approximately 331 CFM. If you would like to compare the cylinder heads and maybe go through if you would like to swap cylinder heads in general, or debate which cylinder head you would like to use for the swap, go ahead and check out my video where I compare Eagle cylinder heads and 6.1 liter cylinder heads. I talk about the actual components of the cylinder heads, the different components needed to actually run them on a 5.7 liter HEMI, and I also compare the flow charts and flow numbers of those cylinder heads at each lift all the way up to 600 or 650 lift. So go ahead and check that out if that is of interest to you. Reworking the stock pre-Eagle cylinder heads will offer power gains and put you above that power mark. However, if you would like to just do away with the pre-Eagle cylinder heads rather than reworking them to maybe achieve a higher compression or for them to have a better flow resulting in more power, then your best bet is to do a cylinder head swap. Those cylinder heads will put you over that threshold, as you can gain about 30 to 40 horsepower depending on the compression and everything else. So as you can see, no matter if you go with forced induction or stay naturally aspirated and do a camshaft with some bolt-ons, you will be able to hit that 500 horsepower mark at the crankshaft, and that's approximately 420, 425 rear wheel horsepower. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please drop a like. It helps the channel out greatly. It lets YouTube know that you enjoyed the content, so it pushes it to more people. Hit subscribe if you haven't done so already. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you in the next one.